Let me look for him.
Kindly.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
Mwiru.
Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, fine, thank you. Nice to see you, Mwiru, after a very long time.
I can tell you, and I can see you, Mlacha. Great to see you.
Thanks. That's very nice, Mwiru. Yes.
Thank you. I'm looking for my panelists so that we can start off.
Mheshimiwa, I'm here, reporting
Oh, great.
and ready. Wafula, Nabutola, sir?
Thank you, Nabutola.
Okay.
So I think we can start off. We are already late by a few minutes.
Konyango is not picking his phone. I'm trying to get him.
Kindly, can we have him on board so that we can start? Konyango, are you in?
I've not managed to get him.
What device can we have?
I think we start because time is not on our side.
Maybe you can join us later so we can start the meeting. My name is Honorable Mwiru. I'm moderating this particular session. I'm happy I'm joined by Mr. Nabutola and Wasonga. And our theme today is that of migration, mobility, and urbanization. In that text, then the sub-theme is urbanization. So, and I'm happy that these are the area that is very important for us to discuss even as a country or even as a world, to say exactly the urbanization trends and developments in the region and the world as a whole and the country. It is also important to realize that population being one of the areas that really touches and matters to do with economic development, social development, and of course, environmental protection, is an area that at least when we look at urbanization and how we can know how those trends could be affecting those particular spheres. So we will begin with the first presenter, Mr. Nabutola. We can begin with you so that we can go to Mr. Wasonga. You have only 10 minutes and restricted, probably we can keep ourselves to that. Then I think it will be good for us. Mr. Wafula.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much. I'll restrict myself to the 10 minutes. I just share with you my game plan, which really speaks to, the first thing is, we're going to talk about what urbanization, everybody understands urbanization, I guess, but maybe we need to define that, we agree on that. Then real estate investments, again, it sounds like common fodder. Then we'll talk about market trends. We'll talk about best practices and risks assessment. So is it me who's controlling this or is it somebody in the control room? Mr. Chairman. Me? Is it me?
Somebody
No?
is moving it for you, please.
Okay, thank you. Can they move then? Thank you. Basically that. I just want to inject something else in here, and that is, given we are discussing real estate and urbanization and investments, I'd like to inject in the issue of the president's big four. Why? Because real estate, whatever we do, wherever we do it, is really controlled by the real estate, the availability or otherwise of real estate. And in that regard, we're saying, yes, indeed, we do build and create many aspects of real estate, but What about the stewardship of that built environment? There is a challenge there. And I'm saying, as we go forward, we need to move away from just assuming that everybody knows to really factor. So with urbanization, which ignore about me. Go next, please. Somebody is there? Okay. Well, we just keep going. Next one. This one you read for yourselves. Yeah, next, please. The next slide. Okay, they're about urbanization. And I'll just move the last bullet where it's saying, yes, urbanization is about people moving from rural to urban. But even the earlier sessions we're talking about, is it structured? Is it organized? And just shows that maybe it's not lights, maybe there's hope there. There has been a trend like that. But question we should be asking ourselves, why can't we make the rural areas attractive and retentive for the able-bodied as well? Because most people who are able-bodied end up going to the urban areas, and in the process, we're living the rural areas deprived and the urban areas saturated with skills and able-bodied people. So the challenge here is how can we have a balance? How can we make, recently so somewhere somebody say, how can we make rural agriculture sexy? How can we make it exciting? And there could be ways we could do that. But then next please. Is somebody there? Yeah, okay. So again, you know, real estate, we all, you know, you can talk about land, buildings, air, and so on, the rights to it. We say real because it's not abstract. It affects the economy. And as a business term, real estate refers to producing, buying, selling, and so on. Kimberly has talked about its critical driver of the economic growth of this nation. And as we are speaking now, 4 universities, Mr. Chairman, are actually offering studies in real estate. That's how important it is. The vice president of the International Federation of Surveyors says, whatever, whenever, whatever we are doing, everything is predicated on property or real estate, whether it's free market economy or a communist market. Next, please. Now, I said I'll talk about His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta's government's big 4. There's the issue of food security and nutrition, that's real estate. Affordable universal health care, that's real estate. Affordable housing, real estate. Enhancing manufacturing, again, real estate. And I added my own bullet there about water and sanitation. The last bit about sanitation is usually overlooked, but sanitation is very key. And I have a riddle for this group to say, one time there was the head and the heart were arguing about who is more important. And in the process, the hands joined in and said, we also are important. The legs said we are important. The kidneys say they are important. You know, the lungs, everybody said that. The riddle is, who do you think came out on top? Who controls all this? That's the question for after, but it's something for you to think about. Next, please. Market trends. Okay, we talk about secular for long term, long times because real estate is usually long term. And you know, an analysis I had about, can you invest in the village? Yes, as you grow older, you want to go to the village. So really, that's the secular part. But in terms of medium term, people want to invest where they can reap some money. Secondly, for very short term time frames. And people are still studying how can they attempt to identify market trends. And here I'm saying the most recent bit about working from home has totally disintegrated the way we would say, oh, this is the way market trends are, and this is what we should invest in. Now, people are working from home, Mr. Chairman. It's totally against what the assumptions we made, and so on and so on. And it's quite interesting. Dr. Julius Kimgenich the other day was saying, is it viable to own a house up country? That's, the jury is still out. Next, please. Next, please. Best practice, again, is defined as that. It's really the issue of standard. Best practices current practice. Things change. And so we cannot say something as this is the best practice. Moreover, best practice for who? Is it best practice for people in the up, best practice for a developing country like Kenya? What's the best practice? So it's again food for thought. But to say it should set standards below which no Kenyan should live. Next, please. Next, please. Hello, are you there? I have 10 minutes. I have to do this. Okay. In terms of real estate, there is improved and unimproved. If something has been done on the land, whatever it is, whether it's a mining shaft or a long store or a road or anything like that is called improved real estate. Anything else that has not been done on it, including if it's in Shabby Desert, nothing is there, nothing can happen, it's an improved real estate. Let's go on, please. There are several categories, Mr. Chairman, of real estate. And in terms of investment, I would like to divide this into government, because government has different reasons for investing in real estate. Then also talk about the spiritual group, you know, let's say the churches and the mosques, the different reasons for investing in real estate. Then we'll talk about corporations, big companies, particularly like maybe insurance companies, have a different reason for that. But the bottom line in all this is they have different motives for wanting to invest in real estate. And it goes to show that the only people, the people in the private sector, it's assumed that they all want to make money or anything, but there are people developing it for other reasons, maybe just for ego. Or if they're developing a club to go and have recreation. So it's not all about money, Mr. Chairman. There's also the issue of education, okay, and so on. Types of real estate. No, let's go on, please. We don't have time to go for now. Types of real estate, as you can see, there are all sorts of categories: residential, commercial. But again, the top one, of course, is government, offices, military barracks, name it. That part of real estate. But government has a different thing. And I've listed them there. You will read them for yourself. Let's go, please. Next slide. How do we invest in real estate? This to me, I think, is key to what we are trying to discuss here. The government levies taxes or borrows from internal or external. There are components of real estate. Kenya, for example, Mr. Chairman, it's been said that sometimes the land part alone contributes up to 40%. Therefore, here we are asking the counties, they should be working on having land banks. That will help ameliorate the cost of producing real estate or developing real estate. Really, whether they're going to go public-private partnerships or public-to-public or private-to-public or private-to-private. But that is on the government level. At an individual level, people could borrow from microfinance houses, mortgage houses, even Prophet Mahmoud Yunus of Bangladesh has come up with something about table banking. I'm told Her Excellency, the second lady in this country, is very keen on table banking, and that is helping people to then build their own houses. That's an idea that we can also borrow. So it's a model, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I would say you want to build, to develop real estate, but you do have cooperatives, have chamas. It's a very good practice here. Again, I saw on TV the other time that especially men, once they're borrowed, their numbers. You know, it's not nice, but there it is. Someone was alleging that. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll talk a little bit, Mr. Chairman, with your permission on this one. As we are speaking today, Parliament is discussing the issue of public-private partnerships with a view to revising it, poking holes in it. Because although Parliament passed the bill to an act of Parliament, there are very many weaknesses in the it was conceived. However, having said that, and having worked at Kenya Wildlife Service, I know for that KWS have models of public partnerships that have worked. KPLC and Engine are practicing similar public-private partnerships. The question is, are they successful or not? In Paris, the city council in Paris outsourced water services for about 10 years. Then they realized it's not as good as it should be. We have never known why, but they reverted to public instead of keeping it private. In Canada also, there have been some successful practices, some weaknesses. So there is a model you can borrow, but what I recommend here is let's not go wholesale. Let's say, you know, that PPP is like a magic bullet. We need to customize it to the needs of the Kenyan communities, the Kenyan situation, a bit different. Next, please. And yes, PPP. The intention is for public good, which government will do. Both government and business working together. What I would like to bring here is the issue of risk, that each party should really be looking at the risks they can deal with, what can they contain. It's not just like that. It should be working in a way that's beneficial both to the parties and, of course, the general public user. Next, please. Commercial real estate. This is talking about, you know, how you want to develop a real estate piece of land, build on it, and generate revenue, and have the potential to do so. Even go to the bank, borrow whatever you have to borrow, and so on and so on. And they own earns in from this rent. That's something. Next, please. Next slide.
Mr. Nabutola,
Mr. Chairman. Yes.
Mr. Nabutola,
yes.
You have already used some 2
yes.
minutes to wind up so that we can go to the next presenter.
Yes. Okay.
You are very
please.
powerful presenter.
Okay.
I don't want to cut you from time. Sorry.
No, it's all right, Chairman. That's why I'm trying to rush. Okay, it's the issue of financial modeling, and again, you can read for yourselves. You have to make certain assumptions if you want to use borrowed money. So that's what I would really recommend. That read for yourselves this. Next, please. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, about the risks. Again, same story. Next, please. Let's go to the next one. Okay. Here, I'd like to spend just 1 minute on, because this is where the challenges are. One is, although we are talking about trends where you want to develop to the highest, there have been a move of people moving into gated communities. And, you know, sometimes the whole idea is security. You know, when you're secure many at a place rather than other sort of single homes being invaded and so on. Contrast that with informal and human settlements, where again government policy says we should and we must ensure we set standards that assure that even the people who live in informal settlements have access to certain basic needs: water, light, name it, storage, and so on. About disasters, again, I'll leave it there. Let's go to the next one, please, before I just, next, please. Okay. Now about investing, I borrowed this deliberately to show the timing is critical in a business cycle, even when you want to invest in real estate. You do not want to do it as they try to do in 1929 and 2007, 2008, when going down. That's not the time to invest, because then you could be losing. So you want to go there, time that to trough and keep going up, and that's when you are, as it goes up. Next, please. Finishing now, Mr. Chairman, bear with me. Okay, now this we can't run away from. Even as you're talking about real estate, making money, and so on and so on, the UN is very keen that each member state provides technical advice and policy guide on slums, because, Mr. Chairman, almost 1% of Kenyans live in slums. And it's our responsibility as leaders to find an objective way of assuring that those slums are done away with or to involve Sustainable Development Goals 10 and 11, which talk about really reduce spatial inequality and poverty in communities across the urban-rural continuum. Next, please, the last one. Next, please. Next. Okay, we have policies. Mr. Chairman, there's the Constitution of Kenya provides, 2010, provides that the state shall take legislative, policy, and other measures, including the setting of standards to achieve the progressive realization of the rights guaranteed under Article 43. And then it's given there that every citizen, every Kenyan is entitled, has a right to the highest attainable standard of health, which includes right to health care, and housing. The rest we can read for ourselves. Let's go. Let's finalize this, please. Okay, this SDGs. These are just this is an upgrade of the Millennium Development Goals. Kenya met some of them, some we didn't, but we are also signatories to this one. And as a country, we are working on how we assure that all our people don't starve, that our people are not, they have good health and so on. I think government has policies to deal with that. And it's just something to discuss elsewhere. Next, please. Excuse me. Yeah, now the World Bank has some way of saying the issue of construction, of building, is not an end in itself. We really have to look at, are there potential disasters? How do we maintain what we've already built to make sure that it serves the intended purpose, and so real estate and so on. So I borrowed this from the World Bank. The recommendation is very clear, and I've shared this with the Ministry of Housing and even Public Works. And it's let's keep going down, please. It's a series of recommendations from the World Bank. And there it is, Mr. Chairman, that it's not enough to just build. Let's also maintain. And as chair of the Building Surveyors Board, we are suggesting that let's recognize the need to maintain what we already have. We have a large building stock, upward of $3 trillion worth of building stock. But how well is it maintained? I think I'll stop there. Is there any other slide? I don't think so. Yeah, the rest is just my contacts. I'll leave it there, Mr. Chairman. I had many things I wanted to share, but in 10 minutes, it's very difficult to condense my brain to feed that. So I'll leave it there, and I appreciate very much this opportunity. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nabutola. That's a powerful presentation. I'm grateful to that, and I think it is also very educative, even in the matters that are happening currently, even in the country. So therefore, because we don't want to take a lot of time, I want to bring in Mr. Wasonga. Mr. Wasonga, your presentation, please.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. It's an honor to join this group and share with you some of the thoughts that I had. I'm wondering if the presentation will be screened. Yes, thank you very much, Mercy. So Chair, I want to spend just a few minutes, the 10 you've allocated me, to share with you some insights into the topic that I was given to discuss on sustainable urban planning and development, but more related to waste management in urban areas. I've been a practitioner in urban areas for over 2 decades and worked with urban planning and development within the same period. So some of the things I'll share will be my personal experiences. But next slide, please. Just to sort of give an outline of how I intend to proceed with this discussion. Mercy, if I could have the next slide, kindly. Honorable Chair, I'm not sure if the screen has frozen or it's my end. Yes, thank you. No, just the one you have skipped, the slide before this, yes. So the way I want to have this discussion, Chair, is in four fronts. One is to try and give perspectives on the recent understanding on the value of sustainable urban development, because I think that's critical for us to develop the scenario of how the waste comes in. Then I'll give certain facts and figures around the urban waste scenario in Kenya. And try and then follow that with the framework that supports this urban waste management. And I then spent quite a bit of my time in trying to generate a nexus between sustainable urban development and waste management. Next slide, please. Now, I'm sure we've all had access to the recent World Cities Report 2020. And one significant thing about that particular report is that it identifies 5 values of sustainable urban development. The key thing about these values is that it combines a lot of what we have spoken about over the last decade, 2010, 2020. One is the value of urban diversity and how we can have inclusive groups living in harmony within the cities and urban areas. The second value is about the goods and services. And importantly, the goods and services is how we derive efficiencies around the economic performance of urban areas so that they're feeding into the national economies. The third value is around resource efficiencies. So looking at how we balance between the environmental threats and resource utilization so that we are not degrading at levels that are unsustainable. The fourth, which is the area I reside in a lot, is having inclusive urban areas as a way in which we can have cities that respect all, irrespective of the economic circumstances or cultural traditional upbringing, so that the heterogeneity of cities is seen as an asset. The last of the values that the World Cities Report brings up is about sound institutions. And I think this is very, very important in looking at how we create a management and management and governance infrastructure that supports all the ideals and including waste management. The other element that I want to share with you is a determination that the World Cities Report brings up around the value that relates to a totality of the economic, social, and environment conditions. But it also goes ahead and also brings in what we call the intangible conditions. And the intangible mostly relates to the residency of these urban areas. Next slide, please. Now, setting the waste scenario is a factor that we all are aware of. We have a largely organic fraction generating society in urban areas. And you can see a large percentage, 60% of what we generate from our urban areas is classified as organic waste. And that has a potential of different dimensions. And then it cascades down, plastic being the next, and so on and so forth. But importantly, from the figures we see in 2019, is the character in terms of the volumes that we produce in tonnage per day. And I'm giving these statistics so that we realize that if nothing is done, then suddenly we'll be choking in this kind of waste. Currently, we're looking at the margins of around 22,000 tons a day that are produced in urban areas. We see that increasing significantly, almost from what we see now to the levels of about 5.5 million produced annually. So those figures are telling in the sense that if we do not take preparations measures, or we don't take active measures now, we certainly would be, as we say, lying an amount of waste in our urban areas. Next slide, please. Now, in support of how we then manage, we have a very vibrant and I think I would better call it robust regulatory and legal framework for waste management, right from the fundamental rights that our constitution offers, where every person has a right to clean and healthy environment. And then it cascades all the way to MCA, which sufficiently places not just an entitlement, but says there's a duty for every person to safeguard and enhance the quality and value of the environment. We have the waste management regulations, and for me, what's more important is then it brings all elements around management and classification. So how do you classify waste into the fractions that I have just shared with you? Then we have the policy of 2013 that brings a concept on integrated waste management. And I think it's very useful in terms of thinking at how you relate clean production with recovery, recycling, and reuse. And then, of course, the National Solid Waste Management Strategy that brings into play the 7 principles of zero waste management. And of course, the principles are all related to reduction, rethinking, and so on and so forth. So if you look at the National Solid Waste Management Strategy, it starts to introduce the human face into the waste management framework. You need to rethink. You need to refuse to discharge waste in different areas. You need to reuse all those human appeal elements. Next slide, please. Now, in presenting action, the government has worked in a number of ways to sort of create enforcement mechanisms that allow us to complement that human nature of waste management. One, of course, is our 2017 popular Gazette notice that banned manufacture, sale, export, and importation of plastic carrier bags. We also have a very important plan, the National Appropriate Mitigation Action, that brings into the equation the circular economy into the solid waste management approach, and actually starts to point at targets. We need to be recycling close to 600 tons a day and putting in place composting facilities. And we have a National Climate Change Action Plan, which obviously is speaking to reducing greenhouse emissions, but more importantly, through the circular approaches to waste management and landfills. So it's important that we look at this framing as we continue to say, what are we suggesting around this that then adds value or emphasis to this particular action framing? Next slide, please. Now, in the last points of my discussion is then to try and marry what I started speaking about as the values of sustainable urban development and the waste management. If you look at the value around cities for all, which means integrating everyone, I think the issue here is to try and create an appetite for waste as a wealth creation agenda. And in many instances, in the Swahili popular word, people have used the phrase taka ni pesa, which then introduces our communities, and particularly those that are densified, like the ones in the informal settlements, to view waste as an economic value. And there are many aspects, if we had time, that we can discuss about how that works. But the reason I say informal settlements, if you look at the graph that I've presented there, it basically is telling in the sense that in our sub-Saharan Africa, we have increasingly large populations that are living in our informal settlement areas. And you can see the increase running right from 2000, which has indicating almost 65% from the source where I derived this information. Now, the second sustainable urban development value is around urban diversity. And I think the diversity is important. How do we harness diversity? It's about having data. We know we have census data that counts and puts populations in terms of numbers. We need to characterize populations because populations that come to urban centers are heterogeneous, and they come with traditions, they come with cultures. And if we invest in using that diversity, there are cultures that are almost allergic to waste, if I could call it that. And we can use that as a way to create a sense in which diversity brings value to our waste management regimes. The third sustainable value around goods and services I think for me, my suggestion in my experience is that we need to enhance the capacity of the county governments. Currently we have the municipal boards that are in place to plan and implement this zero waste principle. And I think it's important for us to have the right sensitization, but more importantly, create action frameworks that are measurable so that we're able to determine whether the human face of the 7 R's principle is being adhered to, and also looking at the institutional face of it. Next slide, please. So in terms of resource efficiencies, what I suggest in this presentation and in consultation with many that we work with is that there's a need for on-source management. How do we educate our society to start thinking about, for instance, separation at source? But you cannot only educate people around separation at source if you do not enhance that education with the market value chain. I need to know, if I separate at source, where am I taking my organic fractions? Where am I taking my plastic fractions? Is it giving me returns, even if it's small in terms of the investment? So incentivizing this through a clear education framework, but linked to the technology available and the market value chains is very important in the resource efficiency value. Lastly, for me, is around sound institutions value. We have to think about engaging public, private, and people's partnerships that facilitate improvement in efficiency in discharge of the mandate. I'll give you a good incline in this, that the current dispensation of our constitution is such that the Urban Areas and Cities Act determines that we need to have municipal boards or city boards or town committees managing our urban areas. Now, these are nascent institutions because they're only recently being constituted. How do we ensure that we have a support framework that links them to the potentials of how they can achieve that function that is delegated to them of waste management at the local arena? So, Chair, I may have run a little over my time, but that's my submission for now. And thank you once again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, presenter, Mr. Wasonga. That is a great and powerful presentation as well. And I think our listeners have heard it. And it's also important that if there's any questions that could be running in, so that you're able to answer some of the questions. But I'm worrying with one of my presenters. Has Mr. Konyago joined?
He is saying he is unable to join. We are still working on it.
Will you bring it in form of the slides, or what will happen?
The slides are with us, now presenting it.
It's a problem.
I may say what he didn't intend to say.
All right, then we shall deal with the two presentations that have been done. And therefore, maybe questions can be coming in so that we are able to answer. But before even then, let me go to Mr. Nabutola. Mr. Nabutola, I want to put a question to Mr. Nabutola. Very good. You have rural urban migrations. When we were doing the devolution, I thought it was one of those things that would have been envisaged, to the fact that we could be having urban rural migrations, because probably it would have attracted more jobs in the rural areas other than the urban areas, and that kind of a scenario. What is your comment on this?
Thank you. That's a very good question, Mheshimiwa. The parameters never changed. The rural areas are still dark. The urban areas are light. So there's this attraction to light, just light. Let's leave alone anything else. But also opportunities in the rural areas are scanty, and the urban areas are bigger and more. So much so that even those who don't have a hope get attracted to the urban areas. However, if we could, and I discussed about this young lady who said, if you make the rural areas more sexy, more exciting, more, even people can see agribusiness generating revenue and so on, then it would naturally retain those who are there and attract those who are already in urban areas. But the parameters have not allowed that. It's been difficult. And it's a policy matter, Mheshimiwa. We need to find a way of making the rural areas attractive. Because what's happening in the urban areas is infrastructure is strained. It was not intended originally to have, like in Nairobi, they didn't intend to have 5 million people in the daytime, no, about 6 million in the daytime, 4 in the nighttime. It's becoming very difficult to service that. So that's the challenge.
Mr. Nabutola,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can you be able to suggest to the policymakers some of those kind of parameters that can be put so that they can become more attractive? Because probably we are overwhelming the towns or the urban centers with the population.
We actually are. We actually are. And the towns and cities are not prepared for the urban, the rural in exodus, in influx coming in. They are not. If we could structure it so that systematically people who come to the urban areas bring something, people go in the rural areas also get something, it would work. We've separately, Mr. Chairman, I wrote a paper on rural urban migration and presented in Morocco and actually won an award for it. So I would be delighted to share that with the urban area, with the policymakers.
Thank you so much, Nabutola. You have also talked about development in the urban areas and that kind of a thing. What is your take on the matters to do with the investment through such as the vertical growth of our properties vis-a-vis the horizontal growth of properties, especially in towns?
Thank you, sir. Again, a very valid question. It stands to reason that with talking about density and so on, population density, but again mentioned about ideally we'd like to have space. Ideally, if possible, or everybody would like to stay on half an acre, 1 acre. They can do their own things and so on. But there are other factors that make it impossible. So government, in its wisdom, has come up with this legislation about, it's called Section of Properties Act, which is, as we are talking, being reviewed, as you know. And the whole idea is to encourage people to own that space up there. And it's practical because then more people can be accommodated in a smaller space. But there's also that issue, which in Kiswahili would say Abunwase principle. And that's, I think, the law has to, be clear, because the person on the ground could say, I want to remove my bid. Then what happens to the people upstairs? So it sounds like a joke, but if people are not accommodating each other properly, it's difficult. So the rules of engagement, the development corporation that will have to run the section of properties where they have been developed need to be very clear, need to be in terms of mechanism for solving disputes. But it can work. My view is that yes, it's the way to go, but B, it has to make sense to the users, the developers, and the policymakers, the people who offer security, the people who offer other services. It has to be viable for them as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nabutola. Even further to that, you realized the government has been trying as much as possible to try to upgrade slums, but there are more which are assuming at the moment, and the population is also increasing in this particular area, which you cannot be able probably to give the necessary services for the dwellers in those areas. What suggestion would you do to the government, or probably to the listeners and to Africa as a whole, that probably we can afford to do in the slums that probably make these people live better lives without being in the slums?
Thank you, sir. Again, a very valid and a very exciting question for me. I've written 2 papers on that, but this is not for me to floss today. The whole point is that slums are driven society, are driven by even the policy making mechanism. The sad bit, and I say this without of restraint, the people who make policies are not living in the slums. So they are not necessarily in a hurry to make that, to make that that call. They don't see as if it's urgent. You remember there was one time an AGU said, I don't know if you remember that. Anyway, coming back to the issue of informal settlements, there are ways in which it can be done. People just need to be empowered. People need to be encouraged to invest in, actually it will mainly be policy. If they can, working with the UN, who have to start with, like in Kibra, where they introduced infrastructure, they introduced roads, they are trying to work with them. It didn't quite work well, but the intention was clear. That make it possible to do that. And government itself also did some work on trying to ameliorate the conditions in the slums by building an alternative there. But it will take time, Mr. Chairman. It will take time and purpose, and we can also borrow from Libya. Those who have read the Green Book by Muammar Gaddafi, and as far as it's concerned, everybody is entitled to something. But maybe it's political. It has happened in Libya. Everybody is housed, and there must be a model we can borrow. Thank you, sir.
So you are saying probably, Mr. Nabutola, probably we can borrow from Libya or something like that, without probably having an homegrown one. Can we have an homegrown one?
Chair, can I add my voice to that, if you allow?
Well, kindly do, Wasonga. Kindly do.
George.
Thanks, Nabutola, who is a good friend of mine, and Nabutola knows.
Hi, George.
I'm very passionate about the informal settlement. I think, Honorable Chair, we need to understand certain facts, and one of the facts is that urbanization trends as expected. By end of this decade, 2030, there will be more of us in urban than in rural. So that's a fact we have to live with. Number two is that the places we call informal settlements continue to host the majority of populations. You saw the graph that I gave. Sub-Saharan Africa, we're talking 60+% of people living in these settlements. What is the asset worth of these groups of people? They come into the city because there is a demand for their services, and they offer these services. What is the city's response to them? The urban areas and cities have not given commensurate attention to their occupancy. And that means in terms of shortage of housing, and we know even as we go through the Big Four agenda, we still have a huge gap in terms of that category of housing. Often we call it social housing. So I think when we want to reflect on what we need to do, we need to see first, what are the efforts that have happened? We acknowledge pretty much the upgrading efforts that have come through government and also World Bank support, because that's about trying to improve quality of lives within this settlement. And that is prime, because it recognizes that these people need to live better life, but it also recognizes they're an integral part of our economy, because we cannot wish away those livers, wish away what they contribute to the urban economy. But having said that, we have also attempted through recent legislation, like what we have in the Physical and Land Use Planning Act of 2019, that identifies special planning areas in urban centers. And I think we have to treat places as special planning areas. The reason we keep wishing them away is because we say, I cannot go and do a 12-meter road in the slums. Obviously, you can't, because the densities are high. But if you can still do a 6-meter road that is functional, like we have seen attempts done before in Kibera and other places. So I think addressing these places as special planning zones gives us the identity that we need to attack the slums as a human face. We need to give them possibility to still access, but may not be at the standard that you have access in Kileleshwa or in Runda and other places. But it's still a road, and it's a manageable road. So we recognize the effort that the legislation has done, especially the recent one on the Physical and Land Use Planning Act of 2019. Now, having said that, I think for me, there has to be deliberate measure in which we try and address our global commitments. One of the global commitments that we have signed into is a new urban agenda that basically tells us we need to align ourselves and make our cities inclusive and socially functional. So how do we ensure that we integrate these areas into our urban fabric? That is by providing good transport connectivity, and that has been attempted in many ways by providing good access to basic conditions, so keeping proximity of where they can find certain goods and services which can be supplied. And there are many, many examples in Latin America and other places of how these processes have gone. So I think we're in a learning curve, but more importantly, we are part of a global environment. So
Mr. Wasonga, let me cut you short, and I'm sorry, but
no
would you please tell us whether when you are planning, do you plan for those kind of things like the slums? At times I find you in towns planning for industrial area, residential areas, and those kind of things. What happens? How does slums come up? Because they are not within your plans. Kindly.
I think first is the slums, you look at it by the character. They occupy places that are very vulnerable. So they are spontaneous response to a certain lack. So what we should be saying is, what are we lacking? If you remember those olden days, we used to have entry houses for people coming into the city. You know, small one-bedroom units that were actually supplied by our local governments. And these units would house you. If you're a fresh graduate, you come to the city, you want to find a job, you know that I'll start with a one-bedroom space. Secondly, our living quarters used to have what we used to call SQ, servant quarters. So if you had somebody giving you service from Kibra or whichever place they're coming from, or even they come from rural, you would house them. Now, those servant quarters have become spaces for a middle income to rent. So what you see is there's generally a displacement. So necessity drives these populations that are coming to the city to eke a living to find a way to still house themselves. And that's why we have spontaneity in slums coming up. But are we anticipating that enough? Yes, if you look at the affordable housing program, it has a category that is classified as social housing. It's just that the numbers that are being supplied still falls way short of what is demanded. So we have to do a lot of corrective measures. And therefore, what we'll continue seeing is still proliferation of this informal settlement, because we've even created more of that appetite by creating centers in devolution. When we devolved, we have created attractive centers that are alternative cities within each of those devolved governments. So each government now has a capital city. So people who are in, say, Turkana County may still find opportunity to go to the capital of Turkana County and flood there and get economic benefits as opposed to coming to Nairobi. So a plus in it is that it will decongest the slums in Nairobi because people will still go back to the rural area. But it may create certain slums if we don't anticipate housing this particular population, because populations are mobile. We will keep moving to where economies make sense. And I'll give you the last example. When you see the character of how our population behaves, every holiday season, especially long holiday, Christmas, Easter, you see an exodus from Nairobi, and a lot of them are people from the slums. So what that tells you is these people are simply in the city to eke some economic benefit because they cannot find equivalent economic benefit in their rural spaces. So as long as economic benefit remains in the city or in the urban area, let me say myself as a rural, I'll still come to the city. But if the city does not anticipate and provide housing, then I'll live in the slum and we'll keep population. The anticipatory planning is that we have a law that recognizes that as a planner, you can identify an area as a special planning zone. All you need is to give it justification. We did not have that before 2019. Now, all these informal settlement areas can be categorized as special planning zones. What does it mean as a special planning zone? It may have certain attributions of service that are not in the conventional planned areas. Because what we called these areas before was, we used to block them as blocks of unplanned areas. So you have a whole 60% of population being categorized as an unplanned area block, because we did not have a legitimate, a legal backing to categorize them. Now we have that. So it's a good starting point. What we need to go into is emphasize the supply for what these special planning zones need. And they need social housing. They do not need, a 3-bedroom house. All they need is give them one room, which is decent enough and supplied with the services. And I think that's the spirit behind the social housing agenda. So, Honorable Chair,
Yes.
I never want to wish away people in informal settlements, because that's the same person who comes to clean my garden. That's the same person who comes to your house.
So are you encouraging that they stay there so that they can clean your garden?
No. I'm saying we can't wish them away from the city, but we can accommodate them better. So how do we accommodate them better? There are models of accommodating them better. And those are the models we need to get to discuss. Thank you.
Mr. Wasonga and Nabutola, the two panelists. I want you to comment on what is happening in this country. In some areas where you find there was some nice planning previously, for example, it's an industrial area, or sometimes it's a residential area. But as time goes by, you realize that those areas have time to be residential where there was industrial, or there's gone industry where it was supposed to be residential. What is guiding this kind of a trend? Maybe I can begin with the Nabutola, then I come to you, Wasonga.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, George, for that input. Very handy. Now, partly, Mr. Chair, is just a level of indiscipline, and also the other one is need. So in terms of indiscipline, it means that our development control and approval system has collapsed, because it's meant to zone places for industrial development, places for residential, and so on. But who is policing that? And the Building Surveyors Registration Board is working on that, but it will take time. Plus, they need to work with the counties. It's not something that can be done, casually, but it's doable. But what has happened is we've lost the discipline as a nation. We've allowed everything to be everywhere. Buruburu was the ideal. Buruburu was meant to be brilliant, but now people have extended this. George talked about the domestic staff quarters have become another guest wing there, maybe sometimes even bigger than the original room. There has to be some sort of discipline and policing so that there's control of what
Mr. Nabutola, what kind of discipline can can put into so that we are able to discipline these people? Do they discipline themselves just generally, or voluntarily, or naturally, or maybe we need to put some laws which are strong enough to be punitive to them?
I think, Chairman, we do have laws, but it's the enforcement of those laws that is sort of weak. But I stand corrected. There could be other people with different ideas. But I think we do have laws that say site coverage should be like this, plot ratio should be like this, and so on. But when people begin to build, sometimes you find somebody has put whoever is supposed to enforce that, put them in their pocket, I'm sorry to say. So, anapita tu anaangalia, they look on the other side when they are passing that particular site. And life goes on. So we really need to work on that. But I stand corrected, and I'm quite happy that somebody could have a different opinion.
Mr. Wasonga, what is your take on that?
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I think number one is that we are not updating our zonal plans as regularly as we should, because urban characteristics changes. In fact, as the more the pressure on urban land, the more the characteristic of the urban area changes. So places may have been designated for a certain use, and with the trends, it therefore emerges that that use needs to change for the better of that urban area. So I think we need to pay attention to how regularly we review and change our zonal plans or urban zoning plans to be consistent with the demands of the day. So that's one. Number two is, of course, land is not, is basically not an elastic element. It's essentially inelastic. So you can only densify and use up to a certain element. We need to start thinking of, should we have densification that's sufficient? And we have a zonal plan that dictates that this is the best appropriate use for this urban land. How do we create other urban areas? And that's why you find there's been discussion around Nairobi and Nairobi Metropolitan, because Nairobi is basically eating all the agricultural land towards Kiambu and everywhere. How do we create metropolis? Some of the suggestions have come through greenfields development, you know, starting a city from scratch, Konza City, Tattoo City. So you start to create different urban areas, and populations and people then go and start creating, you know, settling there and creating another urban, you know, space. So I think for me, it's important to recognize that pressure for utilization of land in urban areas will always be on the rise, because we know that the trends dictate that there will be more people, or will be urbanizing faster than we've urbanized before. But number two is that we need to anticipate those urban trends. We need to say which zones do we secure and retain for a certain purpose? Which zones do we remodel? Because there has to be some sense of remodeling. You can see Nairobi, Upper Hill was a different character 20 years ago. You go to Upper Hill now, and it's another CBD of its sense. So it's displaced the residentials that were there. And that's going to continue happening as long as we do not provide for the demands that the city residents that are coming in would want to see. Secondly, also to just encourage new urban areas to grow. We need to create infrastructure like now we're doing, connectivity between urban areas. We should have people able to go and function in Nakuru and still get the equal opportunity that they would find in Nairobi, for instance. And all that needs is good connectivity. We know cities in Europe and such places where people live 100 kilometers away from where they work. So they come into the city, provide a service, in the evening take a train and go back to their residency. So you reduce the pressure by just creating good connectivity between these urban areas. And some of those efforts we're seeing in the mega infrastructure development are really encouraging in terms of dispersing the concentration within some of these urban areas. Lastly, for me, is basically trying to support these devolved systems. And we already see the trends that as counties get better footing, they're also germinating their own local economic characteristics. And that's becoming attractive and creating dispersal from the co-concentration. So what these counties headquarters need to do is ensure that they have fairly well thought through zonal plans, so that as people come in to settle, it is not an organic growth. It is something that is deliberate and censured in a way. Thank you, Chair.
I think Chair, President, Mr. Chairman, can you
Chair,
unmute
you are
yourself?
muted.
How do we do that now? You are muted, Mr. Chairman. Maybe he stepped out.
No, he's speaking, but I think he's muted.
But I've seen some.
His microphone is
Okay,
muted.
so what do you do with some? Okay. Chairman.
Sorry. My microphone was off. I'm sorry.
Okay, karibu.
Asante.
No, it's all right.
Now, there's a concern from Beatrice Manyonge, and her concern is that what is the future of certain urban areas like Lereshwa, Kilimani, etc., in terms of water, sanitation, and those kind of services? What is your take, Mr. Nabutola, before I go to Wasonga? We don't have much time, but I think we can be quick to respond.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Just a quick one. First of all, ideally, infrastructure development should follow infrastructure. There should have been, but anyway, it's not there. Already they are developed and so on. So there has to be find a way of assuring that that they get services like those, water, power, and so on. It's going to be challenging. I think already it is, because Kilelesha was not designed, was not built to be like that. But now it's there. Where there used to be one residential, now there is 80 of them. So there has to be a paradigm shift in terms of how do we then serve this. They are getting their water, all right, but in the process, I think they're denying other people who also are equally deserving. Like in Kilelesha, for example, Kenya High sometimes didn't have water and the girls went on riot. Why? Because the water had been diverted. So that's the challenge. In terms of solution, I would think we have to work differently and really make it a requirement that infrastructure is first and then development follows. And infrastructure should be supplied by the government, whether it's county or national government, before any other development can take place.
Thank you, Dr. And you, Wasonga, because we don't have enough time, please.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I think first question is what drives these satellite areas to grow? I think it's the private sector. The dominant feature you find is that it's because people need housing, people need offices and so on and so forth. So that's normally the first driver of these satellite urban areas. Now, what lacks is commensurate planning around the public goods, which is both in terms of water, sanitation, and so on. One of the things we have seen that works in certain areas is trying to cluster management and planning around neighborhoods, so that you have neighborhood cohorts that are almost semi-autonomously managed in terms of how do you get sanitation managed in that area, how do you get water services in that area, even it means borehole supply and what is the reach. So it all comes down, Honorable Chair, to planning. We seem to have left quite a bit of our urban growth to happen relatively spontaneously. And what needs to happen then is how do we introduce certain ways in which we anticipate the public goods for water, sanitation, and so on with the populations that we intend to serve. Lastly, I think there are aspects of innovation that we can often look at, because in terms of sanitation, for instance, there's ways in which we can look at very clear private public sector partnerships that would complement the way we work around sanitation through localized schemes. You can create a small public scheme for say waste management or even sewer management and so on and so forth, and link it to the main stream. We still remain pretty much with looking at the bigger picture and saying we need to have Nairobi serviced by one mother, sewer drainage. I think it's about time we started localizing some of this, and there are technology that support that. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nabutola. And maybe a very quick one again. There are some towns that are growing at the moment, and they are growing very fast. Some of them are within the vicinities of the bigger towns or cities like Nairobi. Take, for example, like Rongai and those kind of things. Yet you find some areas, some towns of this nature, doesn't have even dump sites, doesn't have even a sewage area, they don't have those kind of things. What is your take, a quick take on this, Wasonga, in terms of waste management?
Excellent question. I think what we need to do with these expansive areas that are developing faster than we're able to respond to them appropriately, is to have what we call a localized plan, so that if you're going to trade land in a particular area, we've got to provide and make provisions for the public amenities. What we find is we simply focus on, I need a house, I need an office, and everybody then creates buildings that do not take account that for, say, 50 buildings, you need to have a collection center for waste, for instance. So there has to be a way in which we, as the planning authorities, we look at approvals of planning vis-a-vis their connectivity to public amenities, and need to introduce the fact that if it is not already acquired, acquire land for such amenities, so that you have a population of, say, 100, and you zone them off and say this 100 population require a waste receptacle, so that we can have a transfer center from where the city connects to collect now. But you cannot expect that with that expansiveness, then a city will have a door-to-door collection. It becomes very complicated. The second aspect is to encourage self-organizing capacities of this neighborhood, so that they get into cohorts and they're able to say, can we create a management structure to improve our own living conditions, and then link that with the city authority infrastructure. So that's what I could suggest for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Mr. Wasonga and Mr. Nabutola. But I want to have, what is your take now, generally, as a parting shot on the matter of urbanization, land use planning, disposal of waste, and those kind of things? What is a parting shot, especially to the government of this country? Mr. Nabutola.
George, can I go first? Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
yes.
You see, urbanization, you cannot avoid urbanization. It's continues to grow and so on. We do have an entity, an animal organization called the Town and County Planners Association, TCPAC. These are professionals who would assist in terms of how do we make urbanization more organized. And there are ways of doing that. But again, sometimes you find, I was going to say political interference, but maybe not. Let me not use that.
We can hear you.
I think we need to. The chair is a politician sometimes. So, anyway,
no,
the point is,
I'm not about
need. Thank you, sir. Thank you. So sometimes we need to bite the bullet and say, this should not go on. We are going to have things structured. In fact, when I saw the question from Manyonge about Rongai, Ngong, and so on, these are dormitory towns. They are not planned, but they're there. Yet, there should be a mayor working there. But when we are doing devolution, I think we just look at the top level and say, as long as we have a governor, he or she can take care of all the towns and cities around it. It's not going to work. So the TCPAC, the quick answer to that is the city TCPAC, professionals who specialize in assisting, in helping to plan, to plan the various cities, to plan the connectivity, to plan the, everything that is there. So that can be done. The other thing also is, in terms of waste management, I've been to places where waste has actually been converted to energy. And even down River Road, down that side towards Dandora, there are young men and women who are actually using this waste to convert it into energy of some sort. Charcoal, briquettes, and so on and so on. So it's possible. It's possible to actually turn waste into something more useful. But it needs, again, to be properly looked into, so that it will generate employment, you see. 2, it will leave the environment better. So there's everything going for us using waste other than just dumping it. That's, I mean, I could go on and on, but let me leave it there. But there are models, one in Sweden in a city called Helsingborg, where they have fully turned all their waste into energy, and all their buses in the city use energy from there.
Thank you, Mr. Nabutola. And you, George?
Thank you, Honorable Chair. I think my parting shot is really the resounding message, Taka ni pesa. We need to promote that there's value in waste. We know that in countries such as Sweden and so on that have intensified the reuse, recycling, and the re-energizing potential of waste, have to now import waste, literally, because they have run short of what they can supply into their centers. So I think that, to me, should be the underlying aspect. Let us preach the fact that waste is value, waste is wealth. Number two is, for that to work, we need to improve the waste value chains. I don't think we give sufficient recognition to our waste recycling plants. Those who take the plastics and turn them into reusable material, for instance, fencing posts, basins, and things that we use. That particular industry needs to be supported so that people see sense in supplying or rather extracting the waste from going to the landfill, but instead going into the recycling waste value chain. Number three is to provide incentives, I think, at households that what do you gain if you separate your waste? Because that's the starting point. I will take so much effort to create 3 containers in my house so that I can have plastics, I can have paper, and I can have organics. When the waste collection van comes or truck comes, it combines all these things together. So you really feel this intensifies that you have tried to do on-source operation so that it can go to the right recycling chain, but yet the collectors put it all together again and take it to the dumpster. So I think that's the point at which education and attaching incentive structures can work for us. Thank you.
And do you think we can do some registration for the same thing so that probably we can go the direction that you want to guide?
I think the legislation we had, the ones I shared, are extremely rich, because if you see, for instance, the 7 R's principle, it's a very rich legislation. The question is, how do we domesticate that, particularly now within the counties? We need to do subsidiary county legislation that then supports implementation of that national strategy for waste management. I think, yes, we need to do that. Number two is, do we need to then create a competitive edge for counties so that they start seeing that if you're able to recycle your waste, you're able to reuse your waste to a certain element, then perhaps it is attached to a certain incentive schematic. And it could be a little bonus on what we transfer to you as a county. I think, Mheshimiwa, that's within your docket. I mean, people must be incentivized to do that. Thank you so much.
But it's okay. I take the challenge. Our listeners are, of course, participants. Thank you so much for the panelists, Mr. George, for finding time to be with us.
Thank you.
And Mr. Nabutola, as you have also heard that Mr. Konyango sent in an apology, but we also have his notes there. The Secretariat has the notes. So therefore, I want to say thank you so much. That is a very great insight from the country, and even as a government and the people that we live in this country. Thank you, and this meeting stands adjourned for now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you, Mheshimiwa. And all the participants.
Meeting will automatically revert to something. I'm not quite sure what that is, but let's wait to see.
Yes, we will be returned to plenary in 3 minutes, but you can click on the blue leave room, then plenary. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice.